is Camila Ronderos. I am the Executive Director for Carrollty Compassionate Communities, and we are hosting this amazing event today with our great partners from the Charter for Compassion and Compassionate US. And today we have the fortune of having Jillian Racoosin join us from the Foundation for Social Connection to talk about this important topic. We truly believe that humans need connection. That connection is at the basis of everything of who we are and what we need. And so building stronger communities and bigger connection is a crucial topic. Thankfully, today it's also a topic that's being discussed in many other settings, policy settings, community settings, academic settings. And so we're very happy to be able to have a conversation. Compassion is also at the core of being able to build those stronger communities, which is one of the issues that joins us all today as well. We're going to have an amazing conversation today with Jillian. Such a big fan of the work they do at the foundation and of Jillian in general. And we're going to talk about the importance of understanding really what is social isolation, loneliness, and connection. And then from there, what can we all do in different settings of or different sectors to impact or tackle those topics and build better connected communities. So thank you, Jillian and the foundation for joining us today. And take it over and let us know and teach us a little bit about this amazing topic. And then at the end, we're going to have a little time for Q&A and then bring it back so we can close with some closing remarks, both from Jillian and from our side. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Camila. Thank you all so much for joining. If you're on the East Coast, I hope you're also maybe having some lunch, or if you're on the West Coast, maybe having some coffee, or wherever you are all over the globe. Just thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you all can see my slides. And make sure that your chat is working, because we'll do a little bit of interactivity as well. Would love to hear from you all as we kind of go through the presentation. And as Camila said, we'll have time for some questions at the end. But of course, if anything comes up and you want to ask it in the chat, my team members will also just take note of some of those questions that are being asked. So thank you so much again. Can you see my screen, Camila?
Yes, we see perfectly.
Amazing. Wonderful. Awesome. Well, thank you again. My name is Jillian Racoosin. I have the privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the Foundation for Social Connection. I will talk a little bit about who we are and what we do, and this really critical topic that I know so many of you are also working on and helping to alleviate some of the conditions of social isolation and loneliness, and building more compassionate and socially connected communities. But before I dive in, we just would love to hear from all of you. If you want to put your name in the chat, maybe where you're dialing in from, and then an answer to this question, however it's speaking to you. What does a socially connected and compassionate community look like, sound like, and or feel like to you? So maybe just open up the chat. You can think about all the senses, or maybe just choose one. When you think about social connection and compassionate communities, what does that mean to you? I'll just wait a couple moments to see as things are flowing through the chat. Wonderful. Supporting and loving, trust and belonging, connectiveness. Fulfilling my passions and needs. That's great, Patty. Loving and trust. I'm seeing a lot of trust, coming through. United community, genuine connections. That's great. Honors and respects differences, absolutely. Lived experiences, so critical. Wonderful. Keep those ideas and thoughts coming through the chat. Thanks all for your engagement there. And hopefully we'll talk a lot about some of those themes that were brought up in the chat. Just a quick review of the agenda. I will share a little bit more about who we are. SOC 101, just kind of some of the terminology, who is experiencing isolation and loneliness most, and why are socially connected communities so critical for our health and well-being. We'll talk about the social framework, our action guide for socially connected communities, and then go into practical approaches and strategies for addressing social connection and advancing it in your communities. We'll have some time for questions and then a closing reflection. Wonderful. So for the Foundation for Social Connection is a 501c3 nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., but we serve nationally. We are the leading organization really working to advance social connection nationwide, rooted in evidence for our collective well-being. Our work really translates research into practice, of course, creates long-lasting partnerships such as ours with CHWs, and convening opportunities for field builders, prioritizes social connection as a national value, powered by those lived experiences. We work closely with our Scientific Leadership Council, which is really made up of the leading experts on social connection, loneliness, and isolation, as well as our larger scientific network, to make sure that we are bringing the most recent evidence into strategies and policies for greater connection. Our vision is a vibrant society where social connection is at the heart of how we live, and that will come up again as I talk a little bit more about the social framework. So I want to kind of start off by defining some key terms that, these conditions can sometimes get confused with each other. And it's important, especially as we think about developing interventions, and that we understand what's working and what's not working, that we understand what we're intervening on. And so I'll start with social isolation. Social isolation is really the objective measure, the count of infrequent or frequent social interactions with others, engagement in different social groups. It's really thinking about your social network. And, if you close your eyes or you have a piece of paper next to you and you start to think about kind of the circles of care, maybe who's in your inner network, and who, as you kind of go outwards, is in your middle network and outer network. Understanding who shows up there. Is it looking bare? Does it look full? That's when we're thinking about social isolation, kind of that count, that measure of social interactions. An example might be a homebound older adult, or someone who is not able to leave their home and maybe not able to engage in social supports. Might be someone in rural America that doesn't have access to broadband or other types of social infrastructure. Or an individual in a community that's been historically disinvested in and doesn't have, again, access to local social infrastructure such as clubs, groups, associations, and third places. So thinking about social isolation, again, that objective measure, we also have the conditions of loneliness, which is really that subjective measure. The discrepancy between the relationships that we do have and those that we wish that we had. And so you might be in a room filled with people, right? And I'm sure you've heard this before, but still feel lonely if you're not feeling like you're connecting with them on a level that is working with you, that feels like it's high quality and genuine. I know that was brought up in the chat, genuine connection. And so this might be, an LGBTQ youth in school who doesn't feel like they can be themselves in a place of learning. Or a new parent like myself. I have a 4-month-old son at home who has a friend group, but maybe not, able to fully connect with their friends as they were before, who aren't going through the same experiences that they are. And so these are, again, really important to understand these terms as well as many others, but we'll focus on these two right now as we think about evaluating, assessing, and implementing solutions to address isolation and loneliness. I'll also just comment quickly about social connection and the 3 main components of that: structure, function, and quality. You'll see some of this pop up a little bit later as well. But again, that structure piece really points to social isolation. So thinking about the number of interactions and what your social network really looks like. Function, what function do those relationships serve you and serve one another? And then quality, really thinking about positive or negative qualities of interactions. And it's a continuum, of course. But why are we talking about this, and why have we been over the last several years, is because we are facing a global crisis of disconnection. And you can see, millions of Americans are feeling socially isolated or lonely or both. And it's negatively impacting our quality of life and health outcomes. And this is not, of course, just in the US, but this is happening across the globe. So just have some quick stats here. We'll talk about some trends as well in just a moment. but wanted to bring these to light just so you all can see kind of who's experiencing loneliness, most, as we see like Gen Z has reported the loneliest generation, millennials not that far behind them, and also thinking about school loneliness as really increasing post 2012. As we think about trends and look at the trends, the Surgeon General report that was released in 2023 that our team had the privilege again to be contributors for, we can see here some of the social isolation trends, especially as it relates to time spent in social isolation, time spent with others in the household, with friends, with others. And it's really, sad to see that trends are pointing up in terms of social isolation time, and trends are going down in terms of time spent with others. So again, this is also contributing to a lot of the outcomes that we're seeing related to chronic isolation and loneliness. And so who's experiencing this? I want to highlight, that anyone can experience isolation and loneliness, and some of this is acute, but some of it is chronic. And there are groups that are especially at higher risk of experiencing both acute and chronic isolation and loneliness, and therefore experiencing worser health and well-being outcomes. Some of these may come as a surprise, especially as we think about like more digitally connected generations or segments of the population, such as Gen Z and millennials. But we, as I pointed out before, have seen from the data that they're reporting really high rates of loneliness. Other groups that we just wanted to call out, older adults often more experiencing some of that social isolation, lower SES individuals, unmarried or unpartnered individuals. This also relates a little bit to those living alone, people with chronic physical and mental health conditions and other disabilities, BIPOC individuals, LGBTQ plus individuals, caregivers and new patients, veterans, members of immigrant communities, and rural populations. And so you can see a lot of, segments of the population are coming up here that are experiencing some of these conditions. And when we talk about strategies, effective strategies, we want to make sure that we're really thinking about the population that we're looking to serve and that we're looking to help improve their social connectedness when designing those interventions. Just to talk about some of the root causes, right? We want to think about not only the Band-Aids, right, or the intervention pieces, but really also thinking about prevention and some of the more systemic issues that are leading to disconnection. A couple I'll just point out here: hyperindividualism, not just, a US issue, but something that I think that a lot of Americans can understand, that there's sort of this culture of needing to be independent to be successful in life. And it can cause us to sort of undervalue family and friendships and community life. And with that, we've seen a lot of sort of the, deserts of civil society and engagement in social groups, engagement in religious life is really plummeting. And that's really contributed as well to some of this isolation and loneliness. Technology distractions, I'm sure everyone has seen, whether it's themselves or their families or children or so on, that you can get lost to the phones, right? And so how can we, think about putting those down when we can, or really leveraging them not to be a replacement of connection, but as a complement or as a way to help us to connect with others, not being the answer, but being kind of the tool that gets us there. I think also I'll just point out, the mobility, we're moving so quickly, and sometimes we are not necessarily near our families or near our friends. And it again is kind of pointing to some of this disconnection that is coming up. There's a lot here that I could go into, but I will move on to some of the more positive pieces around why socially connected communities are so critical. So we can see, kind of on the left-hand side, some of the outcomes associated with socially disconnected communities. And a lot of this is related to, of course, the chronic isolation and our loneliness. We see physical health outcomes related to cardiovascular disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, mental and behavioral health conditions, and higher spending. And so thinking about the flip side and how the protective nature of social connection is so critical, socially connected communities are healthier. There's reduced stigma around health services, around preventative care. There's better health outcomes reported with feelings of belonging. Socially connected communities are safer and more resilient. Research has found that there's stronger preparedness, especially, thinking about after emergencies in communities. And there's lower rates of crime and violence. Inclusive and civically engaged. I think this also points to the compassionate communities as well. Stronger sense of belonging and collaboration. Lower rates of mistrust. I know trust came up in the chat a lot, and greater feedback loops, supporting more representation in government and in local policy. And then lastly, just talking about, GDP growth and economic prosperity. There's been research that more socially connected communities can lead to growth in the community economically through social capital and other connections, as well as in the workplace, less absenteeism and higher rates of retention at work. I will just move into our social framework, and this is starting to get into some of the strategies for, for advancing social connection. And our systems approach, our systems of cross-sector integration and action across the lifespan, it is a mouthful, so we just call it the social framework, which we developed with our Scientific Leadership Council. It's really a model and a framework to guide our work and what we use to kind of start to analyze the evidence that exists today and understand where there are gaps, and help to collate and put together what are evidence-based strategies that are across different sectors, because we believe social connection is really needs to be brought in through every sector of society, and also every kind of level of the socioecological model. So we can see kind of the socially connected individual at the center. And then as we go out into the framework, we move into interpersonal, so between two people, organizational, community level, and societal level. We also have the different sectors kind of going around, the socially connected individual, society, and community. And in each of these sectors, we've actually put together a literature review and have released different reports looking at not only what is the literature telling us, but what are some of those evidence-informed strategies, where are there gaps, where are there funding opportunities, policy opportunities, et cetera. So we've already released today reports in the health sector, workplace, education, built environment. We have supplemental reports around housing and transportation and environment. And we're working right now on our nutrition report, which should be released in just a couple months. So really excited to dive more into that and how food and gathering around food, as well as nutrition access, is a key piece of social connection. Of course, lifespan kind of is a cross-cutting modality, diversity, equity, evidence, and application. Again, social connection is really critical across the lifespan. And we understand from the data that developing better habits around social connection from a young age can lead to more pro-social behavior and, prevention as relates to disconnection in later life. So 2 years ago, when we were working with different communities around the social framework and around developing and implementing strategies, what we heard from local leaders, including a few on the line today, I won't call you out, Anne, but I just did, in San Antonio. But we worked together with the local leaders to develop the action guide for building socially connected communities. And it's an online, free, open source platform, interactive process that takes you through these 6 steps. And it's really meant to help develop a local coalition on social connection. And that could be also, a coalition that's working on social connection by way of compassionate communities, and really making it, what does your community need? So allowing that time for reflection, reviewing data, and seeing, we actually have a county level dashboard where you can look at the data per county in your state and understand what are the drivers of connection or disconnection that are impacting your specific community. collaborate with other local leaders and bringing different voices to the table that may have already been there, but maybe have been left out that you need to bring to the table to really think about what your community needs, to then plan for an intervention and think about an initiative that makes sense for the segment of the population that you're looking to reach, evaluate that impact, and then share out with your partners, with your community leaders, and potentially even funders to make sure that we're continuing to adjust and grow the work. So if you want to look a little bit more into the action guide, actionforconnection.org, we also listed at the end of this PowerPoint that we'll make sure to share with you all. So I'm going to now go into some of the practical strategies for strengthening social connection that come from the action guide, that come from some of our social framework reports per sector. There are a lot, so I'm just going to cover maybe 5 today that I think are most relevant for this audience. But of course, there are many others, and would also love to hear your feedback on if you've tried any of these, or if you know of any examples of these strategies that you feel like are really gold stars. So the first one is cognitive reframing and emotional intelligence skills building. When we think about, kind of emotional intelligence, skills promote empathy and pro-social behavior. Researchers have identified this tool to be potentially powerful in reducing feelings of loneliness, protecting against social isolation, and increasing social support. These skills can produce benefits not only for the individuals kind of possessing those skills, but also those around them. So pro-social behavior promotes one's helping, reassuring, and welcoming of others. And empathy, which I know is a large part of compassion as well, can also give individuals a greater awareness of their own and others' feelings, which can allow them to better interpret interactions and offer social support to those in need. You might have seen this come up in social emotional learning curriculum, which again can really help increase people's sense of connection to their peers. One example that I like to bring up is the organization Kevin Love Fund, which has developed free online courses that community leaders can use or adapt to promote social emotional skills. They're meant to be used in schools, but I think they also can be adapted to other contexts. And they've seen really great results there. As it relates to establishment of common goals and shared identities, some of this work happens kind of through the action guide process, but initiatives that promote the creation of a shared group identity have been shown to increase levels of social connectedness and reduce feelings of loneliness. Relatedly, individuals who participate in programs such as these have reported better self-esteem, mental health, less social anxiety, stress, and depression. This can specifically be useful as it relates to addressing conflict caused by in versus out groups, us versus them, because researchers have found that identifying shared identities and goals promotes, helping behavior and humanization of individuals from other groups, and thinking about kind of the collective us. Some examples of this are citizen universities, civic Saturdays, where residents can gather to discuss local issues and reflect on their shared values and responsibilities as members of the community, which of course restores and strengthens residents' trust in democracy and in one another, and encourages them to commit to collective action to improve their community. Also, the People's Supper is a wonderful organization that really focuses on meaningful conversations over shared meals, can help heal divisions and build understanding among people from diverse backgrounds. So these are just some examples. And again, I talked about the benefits, but can not only help increase individual social connection and self-esteem, but really reduce othering and promote helping behavior and humanization. Volunteering is really critical. Neighborhood associations, we know benefits. We can improve social connection and reduce feelings of isolation and loneliness for individuals receiving services, as well as the volunteers themselves. So there's kind of that two-way benefit. Provide a sense of purpose, meaning, and belonging for those offering service. It also increases community cohesion, social interaction, and self-esteem, which can help people feel less lonely and more integrated in the community. I will point out some examples here. AARP Experience Corps is a great one. Older adults supporting and helping young children learn to read. Door Road is a wonderful organization based in New York that really focuses on intergenerational bonds, and City Year as well, bringing together volunteers to make lasting impact in under-resourced schools. There's so many wonderful volunteer programs, and I think thinking about ways that you can bring those into your strategy for social cohesion, trust, and community building is really important. Moving on to intergenerational and age-friendly communities, leveraging universal design and accessibility in the creation and operation of community space really ensures that everyone, regardless of age or ability, can access and enjoy them, which really minimizes barriers to accessing and fostering intergenerational communities. The benefits include reducing loneliness, strengthening empathy and social cohesion, supporting those social interactions and collaborations across generations. I have some examples here. The Grace Living Center in Oklahoma is co-located with a public school, an elementary school actually, and really intergenerational learning becomes a part of every day where children and residents of the living community engage in conversation, activities, and learning experiences. In Ohio, Rocky River, the library has a lot of opportunities for the community to come together across different intergenerational programming, including arts-based programming, etc. And Generations United is a wonderful national nonprofit partner of ours that does certifications for programs and organizations that offer intergenerational programming and age-friendly communities. And third spaces is going to be my last sort of overarching approach as we think about common third spaces such as libraries, open community centers, playgrounds, parks, co-working spaces. When I talk about third spaces or places, these are places that are outside of your home and your work. So it's kind of that third place where the community can come together. Of course, benefits include helping residents feel more connected to their neighbors and reducing loneliness, building social capital, so bringing people from different backgrounds to a place where they can meet and potentially support each other and create those bonds. Support strengthened trust in the community, participation, and civic engagement. Listed a couple examples here. There are so many great ones. We know, especially here, I'm in DC right now, there's a bridge that they're building over one of the rivers that's going to be connecting two of the communities to each other. And they're going to be doing a lot of activation around the bridge, which I think is just a wonderful place. You don't think of maybe offering places for transit that also are places of connection. So that's another great example. I'm going to move to a bit of interactivity, an activity for interaction. That's a better way to say it here. So just as we talked about some of those approaches and strategies, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What strategies are resonating? Maybe taking a moment to think about your own community. What would you prioritize, knowing what you know about your community? Also taking a moment to think about who might you partner with and who is not, but needs to be at the table in order to make these interventions or approaches most successful. So I'll give us a couple moments here. I might read some things out from the chat, but would love to have your thoughts around what's most resonating as we talk about those approaches. And I'll just review them one more time. Third spaces, intergenerational communities, volunteering, establishment of common goals and shared identities, and cognitive reframing. So curious if anyone has tried to implement some of these strategies, if they've experienced them themselves and how it makes them feel more connected to their community. I'll just leave us a moment here to offer some contributions. Great shout out for social prescribing in the chat. I'm going to answer some questions that are coming. Wonderful. Thank you, Finley, for also putting the examples in there. What about fourth spaces? Marie, do you want to share what you mean about fourth spaces? You can come off mute if you want. Art is the gateway to compassionate connection. That's wonderful. Art comes up a lot as we think about social prescribing, and if any aren't familiar with that term, is really thinking about mostly in a clinical setting, but it has been used in other settings in the community. But if an individual is experiencing isolation and loneliness and has been identified as such, offering opportunities for that clinician, community health worker, et cetera, to be able to prescribe them to a community support, which a lot of times is an art-based program, potentially, a prescription to go to a museum or some type of art programming in the community. We've also seen some great data coming out, mostly in other countries. We know in Canada, they've done some work thinking about social prescriptions to nature opportunities and public parks, national parks. So a lot more to kind of be evaluating as it relates to social prescription, but some great strides are already being made. Amazing.
Hi, this is Marie. Sorry, I couldn't unmute before. I wanted to just share like the fourth space.
Yeah.
So it's it's growing in popularity. I know like mostly with Gen Z, but not necessarily just. And they're more about building community through intentional, like being people that come together around a shared interest. So for some, it's like a running club. I know I think like Topaz Smith is on here and she does like these intentional cultural experiences. So it's right, people that have like a desired interest that they build community around that. So I I don't know a lot about it, but I've just been reading more and more that there is an interest and people are looking for these type of like fort spaces that are different from what it's literally like a meetup. Like if you really think about it, like you attend meetups based on what you're interested in.
I love that. Thank you, Marie. Yeah, it's sort of like activating the third space one more like step forward in terms of the intentionality and coming together around shared interest, understanding, affinity. That's great. Wonderful. Some really great comments here in the chat. Thank you. I think this would be a good time maybe to move to some Q&A because I'm seeing some questions percolating in the chat, but if any want to add a question to the chat or raise your hand, I think we're in a intimate enough group that we can come off mute if that's okay with you, Camila, if anyone wants to ask a question.
Yes, definitely. We'd love to hear, not just in the chat, but with voices. Go ahead, Whitney.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this exciting presentation. I'm a doctoral student at Indiana University, and I've done some research on social connections and mental health. And something that I noticed is that I think like healthcare organizations are very important to be able to capture people that might be experiencing loneliness or, like social isolation. And I wonder how, like from your experience, how feasible is it to make sure that loneliness and social isolation are actually part of the medical care? Like, is that how can we get to a point where it is a routine to screen for that. Could you speak a little bit more about that? Like, what are some strategies that could help us make that a standardized process? Because I do think that should be maybe a good starting point, right? Like, how do we capture these people? Because the people that are really lonely, like, how do we capture them outside of these clinical settings, right?
Yeah, such a great question, Whitney. Thank you so much for it. I'll touch on a couple of things that are happening today, but also there are gaps for sure. The first thing I'll touch on is the Gravity Project. So not only is it critical to be screening and asking the questions around isolation and loneliness, but you also need somewhere to note it, right, in the medical chart. And so what the Gravity Project did over the last couple years is start to develop ICD-9 and SNOMED codes that can help code in the medical record if there is an indication for social isolation, loneliness, or social disconnection. So the development of those has been developed. Now it's really around the adoption, right, and implementation of those codes and of the screeners, because it does have suggested screeners. Some of the EHRs have already been adopting. So we know, our friends at UCSF, Dr. Carla Pedersen-Nozzo, as well as Ashwin Kotwal. They're both on our Scientific Leadership Council, and they both have those tools kind of built into their EHRs, their electronic medical record or electronic health records. So they can be asking those questions, screening, and then notating in the chart. So that's one thing, is kind of like the practical, can we do it? The second part, of course, is the education piece. So not only educating all of the new clinicians and physicians, but also our existing workforce of clinicians and physicians and community health workers. And we know that there's a lot on the plates of clinicians, and especially as it relates to documentation. And so how do we make this just a part of a routine conversation and check-in versus something kind of additional that they're doing? I think oftentimes it gets kind of pushed to a social worker or some other support clinician, but really thinking about kind of the integration of the conversations that a person's care team is having. And so we worked with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services last year, actually on a pilot to help educate medical professional students around the topics of social connection, and offer kind of these online trainings and webinars. We then worked with the VA, the Veterans Affairs Department, to develop an online curriculum for students around social connection so that they can learn about it, understand how to talk to their patients about these topics, how to ask them questions about it. But it's really just a pilot. It's in early stages. So there needs to be more work done on the testing, the development, and scaling those curriculums. So we're in the early stages, but a really great question, Whitney. We absolutely need to be screening and identifying who is most at risk. The last thing I'll just mention is a lot of healthcare insurers are also now asking some of these questions, especially in kind of the annual check-in with their members. And this, specifically on Medicaid and Medicare beneficiaries are being asked some of these questions as it relates to overall social determinants of health. So the insurers are capturing some of this data as well. And we know CareLT has done an incredible job of screening and implementing social prescribing practices, which is really like the gold standard we're trying to get to.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions.
Thank you. I was just going to join a little bit and do just also, you mentioned it right now. So our CareLT Compassionate Communities, we're also a nonprofit, but one of our topics is how do you involve more connection in the healthcare sector? And so we have been working, and a shout out to the Sanitas team that's connected today on the call, because we have been working with the Sanitas Medical Centers in Florida and in Tennessee that are want to be able to connect better to their patients. And so the methodology that KRLT Compassionate Communities developed on how healthcare institutions can do it better has been implemented by Sanitas Medical Centers in Florida. And they have managed to include assessments around loneliness and isolation in all of our EMRs in Sanitas. And then through the hiring from Sanitas of community health workers, making sure that the providers can address, like you were saying, Jillian, that it's so important that it's not just pushed to another position or to another role, but from the clinical team. And so what Sanitas is doing with our methodologies is doing exactly that, assessing that, making sure that the provider addresses that need and that concern, and then with the community health worker gets ensured that that connection happens to that resource outside. And the community health workers play a key role, and I know some of them are connected today in the call today. Because at the end, they're the ones that ensure that the community resources outside are being identified. You do need someone to do that. And so the community health workers are constantly, knitting that network of resources outside, but also helping those that do not find the resource to connect to others within the people that are coming to the medical centers. And I think the example of Sanitas is actually a pretty good example. And hopefully we'll be able to publish the results of what's happening right now in a couple of months. We're working on a paper with that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Venus Wilder.
Well, there you go, Dr. Wilder.
Sanitas, and thank you, Camila, for just stating, what we've been able to do here. I just want to emphasize how important it is, especially in the times that we're in now, where we're able to routinely help to identify social determinants of health or barriers to care that impact our patients, their well-being, in their health. Sorry, I might have paused, but I do want to say that the providers themselves find it so important to be able to have this as a part of the screening methodology in our practice in our offices, because we know that we might try to prescribe all these medications for diabetes, et cetera. But if we don't have basic things for our patients, including food, then we will not be able to help our patients be truly well. So I do want to just emphasize that in the primary care setting, it is something that is really embraced, and particularly embraced by our providers, and our patients are really getting the benefits of that. We're still working out some of the kinks, making sure that we're doing it well and we're doing it reliably. But it is a practice that we have, and we're getting better and better at it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilder. And I think it's also critical that we have leaders like you in these clinical settings that are really championing the work, because I know it is kind of an additional step and some workflow issues potentially, but I think the outcome in terms of comprehensive care for your patients and for kind of for all individuals is really a key outcome if we do continue to push this forward. Wonderful. Any other questions before I move to some closing reflection? Okay, wonderful. Well, just a closing reflection. If you again want to go in the chat, or you can even come off mute if you want to add something that has been on your mind, but just curious what ideas you might be taking with you today, whether it's something on the slides or just something that kind of jogged your memory that you're working on, or that you might have connected between your work and this work. How might you foster compassionate and social connected communities, today, and how might you contribute to the cause? If anyone has any thoughts that they might want to share just around some closing reflections from the content today.
I'd like to share something.
Yeah, of course, Valerie.
I have been with Carrollty, and I just did the transferred over to Sanitas in the advanced care program for Sanitas. And I got to tell you that this is an amazing, amazing group to work for, and how I'm learning a lot about it's kind of getting adjusted to remote work also, but I'm learning a lot on how to the trainings that they have. It's incredible. And this is a very, very good. I really enjoyed this presentation because this topic is very, very significant. I I I got into this field because I lost both of my parents. And when I saw that what things happen through the healthcare system, there can be some injustices. And I basically really wanted to make a difference. And I feel like working with Sanitas, I have been making a difference.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you for sharing that. And I think you hit on two things. One is the lived experience, right, of why we come into this work and what continues to drive us to make a change. So thank you for sharing that. And then I think the partnership piece, which I know Patty also talked about in the chat, that we can't do this in a vacuum. You know, the whole point of social connection work needs to, we actually do it in connection and in community with one another. And so learning from the successes, learning from some of the challenges, building partnerships, not only in local communities, but also nationally, is so critical for the continuation and success of the movement. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes.
Do we have any more questions? Nope. Go ahead, Jillian, if you want to wrap it up, and then
Yeah,
we'll do some
I
closing.
think there's a question about sending out the recording. We definitely
Yes, we will.
will. Okay.
Yeah.
The slides.
Yeah, everything will be shared. Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Camila, and to this wonderful audience for your participation. I'm sure we could all learn so much from each other, which I'm excited to keep connected with this group. So thank you for having me, Camila.
Well, thank you, Jillian. You know, I'm a huge fan of the work the foundation does, and we've been working together for quite a while now. And thank you, everyone, who joined and who shared their knowledge here. We will be sharing, of course, the recordings and the slides from Jillian. And if anyone is interested in keeping connected, we can also share, if everyone agrees, the names and emails of the people that participated today so that we can continue connected. We do want to share, because we talked so much about social prescription today, we do want to share that the 19th of March is actually World Social Prescribing Day, and there will be an amazing event hosted that day by Social Prescribing US, which is a movement that I think both you and I are part of as well, that are pushing also to get more social prescribing in the US, and they're doing an amazing job. So they're hosting this webinar as well on the 19th. So just a shout out for that as well, for that day. And then be on the lookout for your emails. We'll share everything. Hope we can all stay in touch and continue learning from each other. All of the resources from the Foundation for Social Connection are actually all in the chat, which will also be shared when we share everything from the recording. Thank you, everyone who joined. Thank you, our co-host, Compassionate US and Charter for Compassions, and of course, Jillian and the Foundation for joining us today.
Thank you.